Hello, welcome to CrossCurrents, produced by the City of Fort Collins in cooperation with the Larimer County League of Women Voters. I'm Barbara Rutstein, the moderator of today's program. Our program is there a TIF about TIF? Tax Increment Financing. Tax increment financing is not new to Fort Collins or Larimer County. It is a method of financing that encourages development or redevelopment in underdeveloped or distressed areas. It was first used in California in the 1950s to spur development and gradually spread to other states and localities all over the country. So what is tax increment financing? How is it used in Colorado and more specifically in Fort Collins and Larimer County? What are the current and future impacts, and are there ways to influence economic health of our city and our region with or without tax increment financing? To give us some insight on the issue and help us understand tax increment financing, we have on my right Rich Shannon, Vice President of Pinnacle Consulting Group. On his right is Linda Stanley, economist, and on her right is Ron Lotzenheiser, owner of Big O Tires. Steve Johnson is on his right. He is the Larimer County Commissioner. Welcome to you and to our studio and our television viewing audience. Let's start first with a definition of tax increment financing, and we're going to ask our economist to begin that definition.
Thank you, Barbara. I wanted to start out by saying that there is definitely a TIF about TIF. I did a search this afternoon just to see what was new out there, and there are so many websites now that talk about the costs and benefits of TIF, so I think there's quite a dialogue going on. But a TIF begins with an urban renewal area or an urban renewal district, and that has to be declared before the TIF, the tax increment financing, can be used. Basically, you have to see if that area meets one of, in this case, 11, in the case of Colorado, 11 blighted conditions. That is that there is some blight on the property, and that can be from lack of infrastructure. It could be from broken sidewalks, many ways define what is blight. Once then the area is declared blighted, what happens is that there is a process set up whereby the developer, private developers, or the municipality can receive monies to help with development, or for the municipality to help with the public improvements in that area. And it basically happens through property tax increment. That is, there's a base of property tax that was collected prior to the URA being designated, and then they estimate what the increment will be once development is done on that piece of land or on that piece of property that's being developed. And that increment can then be used. It is collected and it can be used to go to developers to basically subsidize a development project, or in some cases it comes back to the city in order to, or the municipality in order to make public improvements. And it's also used for financing costs, because these subsidies happen up front, but all of the money isn't collected up front. So much of that increment can go to financing costs, and it can be a significant amount over time.
Okay, anybody want to add to that? No?
Good definition.
You like that definition?
Very good.
Okay, now the one question that I have is the money in the URA comes from bonds, right, that are issued. It's not from the general tax.
Bonds are the financing tool. The
Right.
money in an urban renewal district, or in our case, urban renewal districts, comes from the increased property tax that we as business owners pay through the improvements. For example, if I have a piece of dirt that's taxed annually at $100 and I put a new building on and the tax goes to $1,000 because of my investment, that $900 additional tax flows, and I'll let Steve address his slide in a minute, that flows into the coffers. The city, as they've chosen to start some projects, will actually lend money But once you have a revenue stream, they extract themselves in most cases and they bond it. But we do the project or area because we have a AAA bond rating in Fort Collins. We're very, very fortunate, and that gives us very low financing costs, probably as low as you can attain.
Okay, so
today.
it doesn't come from the general fund, it comes from financing. That's all I was trying to get to.
Well, the actual cash comes from the lender, the bond issuer.
Yes.
But the money comes from me when I pay my property tax.
Right.
And because of Gallagher, I'm taxed at 29% of assessed value.
Okay, now let's go to a visual of that. We have a graphic that we can show, and it shows the TIF, the tax increment financing, assessed value, that's what the AV is, over the project life. And Steve, why don't you explain that?
Sure, be happy to. This graph shows on the horizontal bottom axis time. So at the beginning, 0 time, the Urban Renewal Authority is created. The value of the property at that point is measured, and that becomes the base property for the entire 25-year period of time. And as Ron and Linda mentioned, the improvements that occur on that property for a 25-year period of time raise the property values, and then that generates additional property tax that normally would have gone to the counties, the schools, special districts like the health district, the library, Foothills Gateway, and fire protection districts. But instead of that increment or the yellow triangle going to those taxing districts, it stays in the Urban Renewal Authority to accomplish those improvements. And then after the 25-year period of time, the URA is dissolved, and that total value then goes to all the taxing entities.
Okay, now is it always a 25-year period?
That's the maximum that it can be. And I
Like
think,
Colorado statute.
yeah, and
Right, but it could be less.
I think it could be, but I'm not aware of any that have been less.
Okay,
And I think one of the important assumptions, one of the things that's written into the law is that the reason why a URA is done and why tax increment financing is used is that this would not develop except for this money. And that's where you start really getting into a lot of the controversy about whether or not this development would have occurred in any of that time period over those 25 years, let's say, without that tax money being given back to the private developer.
okay,
and Linda's
now,
totally
Ron,
right about that.
Ron, I think that you were involved in the North College development. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about that and tell us
A
if
small
you think...
group of us are probably largely responsible for today's discussion, because back in 2002, 4 of us representing the North College businesses went to John Fishbaugh, then the city manager, and we asked him why in this strong economic time, 2002 and 3, our property values, our taxes, our assessed values were declining. I just came from Denver. I just retired. I'd eat lunch at Austin's and drive north on College, and I'd cross the railroad tracks. And I couldn't believe the difference in our city. I later dubbed it the other Fort Collins. So as I began to question and ask, and we turned to John, and what we simply said is, we have terrible streets, we have no sidewalks, dirt street, utilities aren't buried. For 50 years, the city largely, 50 years, largely ignored the north side. So we began to ask why. John became a friend. In his concluding remarks, he said 2 things. One, I'm leaving. And secondly, we're going to have some severe budget problems here if we can't raise our sales tax. We're too dependent on sales tax. We just can't meet our needs. Don't depend on general revenue. They just don't have the money even if they want it.
Okay, so was a URA formed then?
His recommendation was form a URA. We spent 2 years fighting it.
Fighting
were-
for it or against it?
No, we opposed it. We were terrified and still are afraid of eminent domain.
I see. Okay.
Every urban renewal, not a DDA, but an urban renewal, one of the tools in there, and we saw that in the recent Sears discussions, didn't have to use it, thank heavens. So that was a great fear factor. So we got past that through assurances, which was simply Darren took over as city manager, council came in, And they simply said to us, you're just going to have to trust us. We will not use eminent domain only as a last resort.
Okay, well, has the Urban Renewal Authority done its work in North College?
I don't know if any of you go to North College. There's probably only two reasons people go there, to go to the Poudre Canyon or to visit Jack's.
Don't tell King Supers that.
I'd like to tell you that you would come to Big O Tire, but that's not why you drive up there. We have transformed the team. Now the team, this can't be done with one person. Cathay Reynolds from the county, Lou Gator, City Council, Darren Atterbury, staff. We are transforming the north side, and I think within the city of Fort Collins, and even within our urban renewal district, we have made mistakes. We didn't know what we were doing, quite honestly. I think the city, the council, and ourselves learned, and we made errors. But I think on balance, we did a lot more correct. And without TIF as one of the tools, the north side would not be where it is today. There is a good question Linda brought up earlier, but would it have developed anyway?
Well, that's the question. That's what we're asking.
Well, see, I have a problem. I'm 70 years old. I don't want to be dead. So one thing TIF can do as a tool is to make certain things happen faster than normal. And then the city, through its values, have got to decide whether that's a good thing or not.
Okay,
So
Steve?
can I say, Barbara,
Sure.
that I agree with Ron. I think, I've lived in Fort Collins over 30 years, and the north area was definitely neglected. Probably would still be that way today without some form of public investment. I don't think you'll find any disagreement from people that are concerned about TIF that public investment, public subsidization of development can produce good things. They can produce good things in North College. Putting $57 million of public investment in a mall can do good things. Those are the ends, and I think we're here to debate the means of the policy. Do the ends justify the means that we're using? Is tax increment financing the best way to affect these public investments? Because the increment that goes back into the URA, that doesn't go to the county, that doesn't go to the health district, that doesn't go to the library, that doesn't go to the fire district, that produces a hardship for those other entities. And when a city forms a URA, they don't ask. They don't ask the county if in 2012 these URAs can take $3.5 million out of the county budget of revenue that we would otherwise receive. So I think what we should focus on as a community that collaboratively works together is the TIF mechanism the best mechanism to do this? I think the TIF mechanism has problems. I think it has flaws. And I think that this community can do a better job of affecting those public investments without using just the Colorado statute mechanism.
Okay.
But Steve, would you also agree, though, that anyone that's in this discussion that tries to use numbers has to first say it's all guesswork?
Absolutely.
There's no definitive math here that anyone can really hang their hat on. And I'm not picking on you, but use the number you just said, $3.5 million that's not going to the county. It gets to the heart of every discussion about tax increment finding. Would that $3.5 million have been there in the first place if the new development didn't take place?
Mm-hmm.
So
It's the chicken or egg.
But there
it's
are
classic chicken or the
economic
egg question.
studies.
You know, Rich, I don't know. I think that's the answer. I don't know if it would or not. But I'll tell you one thing I do know. I do know that for 25 years there will be additional development and put demands upon the county and the other taxing districts, and we will receive no additional money over the base to serve that
That's just
development.
property tax,
Right.
right?
Yeah, that I do know.
And mainly that's what you would get, because that's what you rely on, is those property taxes. The county is largely based upon, financing is based upon property tax.
Whereas the city, it's sales tax.
Yes, and
But the
there
other-
have been
Wait a minute,
economic.
let Rich finish.
But the other part of the math that gets very difficult to do is we look at a defined area, a few square blocks where there's an urban renewal area designated, something nice happens, new development takes place. Clearly there's some kind of ripple effect that goes beyond the boundaries of that, and those taxes do increase. I live a few blocks from the mall. I'm expecting to pay higher property taxes. I probably live 10 blocks away from the mall. And when that gets redeveloped, I'm quite sure, and candidly, I'm fine if my property taxes go up, and the county will get their share of that. So the math is very difficult to do.
I think
But that
there- I
doesn't
think-
mean.
Wait, now,
if I could-
Linda.
Yes, if I could just get in here, that, just because the math is difficult to do doesn't mean that it's a policy that should be done. There are quite a few economic studies out there that look at what has happened in neighborhoods where there is not a TIF district and not a URA next to them, and what has happened in neighborhoods where there is a URA next to them, and there is virtually no difference in the property taxes of the neighborhood that has the TIF near them and of the neighborhood that does not have the TIF in them. And so the evidence that I have looked at and that has been done by economists that don't have a side one way or the other says that most of that revenue would have come anyway. And so what the city's basically doing is treating this as free money, that there aren't costs of serving this new development, when in fact we know that there are costs of serving the new development, without the county having any say in it, without the state having any say in it. And then somebody else, the taxpayers, are the ones that end up holding the bill. They're the ones that have to pay. I agree with you, Ron, that North College may not have developed without a TIF. I still think that some of that, there should have been more talk with the county, there should have been a share back, and that there shouldn't be such, North College Marketplace shouldn't have got $8 million.
I can tell you, Kathy Reynolds at the time sat at our table. She was an intimate part of every discussion. We never closed the door. I agree you can debate whether it should have gotten $8 million or not. In fact, Councilman Olson, who you know rather well, did a wonderful job disciplining us, teaching us, by challenging us when we looked at a project. And one of the things we tried to do, because I would say 99% of the TIF money collected through additional property taxes, because we were ogres on this one, went to infrastructure. We have $75 million of unfilled infrastructure on the north side. And that is where the largest portion of the money goes. One of the things cities across the country have done wrong for whatever reason, they build sewers and water lines and they don't have sinking funds to replace them. Mm-hmm. So where did our money go? The largest portion went to North College Avenue. It was our #1 project. Regional detention ponds, sewers, and I don't want to bore everyone with all the projects. We didn't put this in new cars and new homes. We replaced sidewalks and curbs and gutters, etc. That's where the money went. And I think the city, led by council, who is the urban renewal authority, did a great job. Did we make some mistakes? I think we did. We could challenge RMI squared. We can challenge the marketplace. I'd be the first one to say we probably, and I didn't vote on them, we only made recommendations. But I think on the whole, we did well. Should the city, or any city, Estes, other cities, should sit with the council, and I don't think there's any doubt, because I happen to live in the county, and I happen to be a citizen of the county as well as the city. And your needs should be taken, and it's my knowledge, we happened to listen to Darren Atterbury yesterday at a presentation, perchance, and he said they have a meeting, I believe, Steve, with you, starting in July, where they're going to sit down, and I heard you say in another presentation, correctly, you just want a seat at the table like you have at the DDA in Fort Collins, and I think that makes eminent sense.
So, I think we can do better, but I think Rich raises the key point here, is in the theory of URAs is that this public investment will stimulate growth around the URA. In some cases that happens, but in some cases it does not happen. It's hard to project in the future. We had the assessor's office look at the effect of the North College URA. I think it was started in 2004. We looked at commercial properties. 2005. We looked at commercial properties before that time period over several years and commercial properties after that time period over several years. And we really didn't see a change in the rate of appreciation. Now, we haven't had enough time, and we've had other variables, so it's hard to study. But here's one thing we do know that concerns us in the county. The city of Fort Collins right now, from Willocks Lane on the north to south of Harmony, on both sides of College Avenue, is one continuous urban renewal authority or a downtown development authority. Not all of that is TIFed, but the Midtown URA, from Prospect to South Harmony, is 4 or 5 miles, both sides of College Avenue. So if there's growth in those commercial areas, if that entirely becomes TIF, the North URA is all TIF. So if there's any growth inside there, the county and the other taxing entities don't get any of it. Our concern is that we see this mechanism increasing and growing. So the amount of property that can appreciate, the rising tide that can lift our boat, is all being eaten up by the growth of urban renewal authorities, and we see that as a real concern. The good thing, as Ron alluded to, is that our city council and our council members are showing some willingness to realize that this is hurting the county, and they are willing to talk to us about that. Colorado law doesn't require them to do that. There's a flaw in Colorado law. But I think our policymakers who work well together, that's what the voters want us to do. We can do a better job than the minimum the law requires, and that's what we're hoping for.
Okay, why don't we look at this other slide, since you brought up where the money goes?
I did. I brought this one too because when you talk about that increment of property tax that Ron and other businesses pay that stay in the URA, I mean, that sounds very good. There's a lot of implications that aren't immediately obvious because there's about 42 taxing districts in Larimer County that are affected by URAs. So that money doesn't go to those that money that otherwise would have gone there if the development had occurred without a URA, and we don't know whether it would or not. That's speculation, right? But that money would have gone to the county. That money would have gone to schools, Foothills Gateway, the Library Health District, and Poudre Fire. And this is for 2012, so this is what is currently happening. And in 2012, URAs around the county, there's about 10 of them, diverted $18 million of property tax, which normally would flow from taxpayers like Ron to the taxing entities. That increment now goes to the developer or the URA. So about $18 million of property tax was diverted. That does good things. It helped North College. What we don't think about is what effect did that have on Foothills Gateway with the increased waiting list for developmentally disabled children? When the voters said, hey, we're going to tax ourselves, our property tax, we want that to go to helping developmentally disabled children. And now the city, through their action, didn't ask Foothills Gateway at all, took $122,000 of that property tax that the voters directed to Foothills Gateway and diverted it to URA. They took $3.5 million from the county. So there's an opportunity cost. Yes, it does good things in other areas, but I think what we as policymakers need to responsibly think about is what are we doing to the other entities? We want to help other local governments, and we don't want to build up one of our local governments by hurting or tearing down other local governments. And that's what kind of the TIF mechanism does. That's the basic problem. But I think what we as policymakers can do is sit down and work and say, can we do a share back? Can we do other mechanisms to accomplish this? East Harmony developed without tax increment financing. So I think if we're dedicated public officials and if we work collaboratively and cooperatively, we can do better than the law requires. But my point of this graph is there's a lot of entities that are hurt that probably we don't consciously think that that's happening because they don't get that revenue for 25 years, but we still have to serve. 86% of what the county does, we do within the city as well as in the rural areas. And a lot of people think, I live in the city. What the county does is way out there in the sticks, right? But the vast majority of what we do, we also do for citizens in the city. And I think, the city wants to be a world-class city. We want them to also. But you can't have a world-class city in a second-class county. We really need to develop win-win situations rather than a win-lose situation.
Okay, so can you go back to those entities and get a share back?
It's possible. The law doesn't require that. It's difficult for a city to do that because the URA, the tax increment financing law now, allows the city to take these entities' money and spend it without their approval. That's the basic problem.
Well, wait a minute. The one thing you keep saying, take their money and not spend it.
Take their future revenue.
Yes, but we don't know if there would be future revenue.
Well, if there isn't future revenue, they won't be able to pay off their bonds, so there better be.
Right.
But there's future demand for 25 years, and all you receive for that 25 years is the base, and you have to serve those entities.
Okay.
So the
And
law
by the way, we
allows
don't disagree.
the law
Yeah,
allows
okay.
share
Rich?
backs, and as a matter of fact, the DDA does a 50% share back right now. So at least those entities receive some money to serve the needs.
And actually, the county was very benevolent because at the end of the first 25 years, you could have now legally said to the city, no share back. No share back. you guys, the county, was kind enough to enter into negotiations. I was there
With the DDA?
with the DDA.
Okay.
And the support from the government, I mean, the city manager, council, and others, to do the 50% share back. So I think you were very benevolent, and I probably would remind my friends. There's also another point, though. When we annexed, you mentioned Harmony down to Carpenter, when we annex areas into the city, we take all the cost. Police, street maintenance, et cetera, and the county doesn't rebate back. So that street runs two ways. What does the city get? Of course, they get additional revenue because the sales tax goes from whatever the current levy, I think it was 3,334 outside the city, goes to 7.5 proc. So there's other revenues the city gets.
Right. So the city has expenses too. Rich?
Correct.
Barbara, a couple things here are important, especially related to the graphic that's up there. But before I respond to that $18 million graphic, I'd just like to try to put this discussion in context. We have a microscope out here today looking at tax increment financing, but it's equally important to bring the telescope out. Why have there been a proliferation of tax increment districts? What is it that's causing public entities not to be able to fund their necessary services? And this is probably a discussion for another evening, but I think it's extremely important to point out that the economic model that we use in the United States right now is probably no longer functioning. It's not providing the necessary revenue for public services, and for many private individuals, capitalism as we know it today is not functional. It's not getting the job done. And I don't say that as anyone by any means. I don't think anyone, especially some of the audience, are going to view me as a left-wing radical. But the literature is something that everyone should be aware of. And I just want to bring up a couple here. This is a 2009 magazine from Sperry Van Ness. They're a regional real estate brokerage company. Hardly strong left wing. But I love that in the middle major article, after capitalism, posing the question, is capitalism as we know it today functioning? And I think the answer is no. What we don't know is what's coming. Something's evolving, we don't know what it is, but it also means our leaders aren't capable of working with the public to talk about what's changing, what's not working, and what has to evolve so that both revenues to meet private individual needs and revenues to meet public needs are being met, whether it's the school district, the county, or the city. So to be critical of cities, I'm going back to the microscope now, to be critical of cities for using the few tools they have, and tax increment financing is one of those, that can allow them to do what they're charged to do. I mean, we can debate that at length, but it's missing the bigger issue. Now I'm going to bring the microscope out again if I can a little bit.
Sure.
To look at that $18 million, unless we put in that into context of all of the total budget of all of those entities, which would be in the hundreds of millions, we really miss the context of the discussion. And I want to share some thoughts that were given to me by 3 different school superintendents about the ripple effect. And this is the very intangible but real part of the benefit of tax increment financing. And especially if we look at our Downtown Development Authority. What an incredible success, what an incredible downtown we have, and as a result, we're attracting some very nice employers. We're a great place to live. People bring their companies, the entrepreneurial spirit that's here. So to paraphrase feedback from 3 different school superintendents that I visited with when we were proposing tax increment financing, the essence of their comment was, the money is almost insignificant in our budget, what we'll lose. It's so relatively small, but don't expect me to say that publicly. Because whether it's 100 million, not 100 million, but whether it's 500,000 a year or $1 million a year, to the average citizen, that sounds like a lot of money. To the school district, it's a drop in the bucket. It's 1% or less probably in some of these large school districts. But the counter is, but what you bring us, when you bring those great employers to town, you bring us mentors, you bring us businesses that work with us, work with our students, provide internships. This is really, really important to our school district. I just can't put a number on how important that is. That's the school district superintendent saying that. So that's the kind of feedback I've gotten from school superintendents, and that's at least half of the money that's up there. Also, 10% of that $18 million is a voluntary, quote, loss. It's the cities that created the TIFs are losing $1.7 million in that graphic.
And the schools are backfilled, right?
And the
So the
schools
schools
get the
are-
money.
And that's a problem. The schools are getting
The
backfilled.
schools don't
but-
have to worry about the loss in revenue because they get backfilled.
But
That's
then the
why
ripple effect
superintendent's not here
still,
with you.
the ripple effect still goes back then to the state level, and you ask, well, there's backfill to the schools, good. And then the state legislators are saying, we don't have the money to backfill. So that's still a problem, that the economic system we work under today just really isn't getting the job done. And that's why we're seeing elected officials at the city level relying so heavily on tax increment financing.
Rich made a really good point about the Downtown Development Authority, which is very successful, that I think we can't miss. There's a couple things about the DDA model that I think might be a way forward for us to look at some of these other areas. First off, on the DDA, the county has a vote. I sit on the DDA board, and I have a vote there. So we are at the table. We're not at the table in North College URA. We're not at the table in the mall or any of the Midtown URAs. We don't have a say there. We do with the DDA. We like that. Secondly, the DDA only takes 50% of the increment. So there's a lot of good development. There's a lot of good economic activity. There's some additional costs for the county. But we get 50% of that new property tax revenue that comes in to help serve the Downtown Development Authority. The third thing is the DDA is very judicious and very prudent and very conservative in how they finance projects, and that's very important.
So it's
But-
NFCBA.
Yeah, but the thing about the model is we have a vote in the Downtown Development Authority, and we don't lose the entire increment. So we do get the ability to pay for some of our
After
costs.
25 years, you didn't lose the
Yeah.
increment.
Okay, now I think we have some questions in the audience. Moretta?
Yeah, this one is being asked on behalf of one of the audience members who would rather not. Is TIF being demanded by developers when making proposals?
Who can answer that? Is TIF demanded by developers?
I can answer that.
Okay.
TIF is not demanded by developers. One of the things we used to get concerned with as a citizens advisory group, we cautioned some of our city staff not to use it too much as a carrot, because we didn't want to give all the TIF away. We wanted to be judicial with the money. But in principle, if a project is economically sustainable, and we've had some of these, we don't give them a dime.
Well, but I think it gets into the abuse versus good uses of TIF. And one of the things that is happening around the country right now is that developers and businesses are trying to get incentives out of local governments because they can, and they play these cities off one another. And many times it doesn't make that much difference on where they go. And the cities feeling as if, oh my gosh, we have to pay this amount of money, and I think this is what happened with the mall, or they're not going to develop this, they're coming up with these packages that are more and more generous all the time. And it's because of this competition between these cities. It gets back to what Rich was saying about this competitiveness between the cities and the way that we finance our cities now can be a real problem. And so, again, looking at these, there have been good uses, and maybe the downtown area is one place where property values have gone up, because in fact the DDA did a wonderful job, and they have a lot of protections in their contracts and in their agreements with developers. They're not left holding the ball if the increment doesn't come in as projected, which is something that's happening in the Midtown area with the Capstone project. The city is actually going to have to pay out $700,000 in order to pay for that particular project, in order to pay the increment and the finance costs that were promised for that particular project, due to bad estimation of what the property tax increment was going to be. That wouldn't have happened with the DDA.
Okay, tell us what the Capstone project is.
Well, the Capstone project is that project on College that I know so many of my coworkers have said, what is that?
College
That's
and Prospect.
awful. It's right south of Prospect. It's a college housing project, and it sits right up on the street. It's right
yes.
next to Discount Tire,
Yes.
which is not there right at the moment. and it backs up to the railroad. And they received $5 million, or the URA commitment is $5 million. The financing costs are going to be $2.4 million, and the increment now is going to only be $6.7 million.
What does that, why is it only going to be 6.7?
Well,
Because they're taxed at 7% residential rates instead of the wonderful 29 that I pay.
That's the
So
assessor's,
therefore-
that's the
Yeah,
assessor's
That's the
estimate.
But the city
Okay.
originally estimated that amount wrong.
I see,
And so
okay.
then and I'm not just blaming it on the city, I'm sure, I'm sure there was many people involved in this, but they overpromised. And therefore, it's
Yes.
going to end up with the taxpayers of Fort Collins paying for this. I don't know if it will come out of the general fund or where, but we're on the line for that. And that's a project that I have to say, although I think we need student housing, it's not an attractive project. Anybody that I have
Visually.
talked to, visually, they don't think it's an attractive project. There's have been some problems with recycling cardboard and deconstruction waste. There's been a number of things that have happened that I think if the agreements with the developers were written tight enough, like the DDA, these things would not have happened. And so again, it gets back into how is this happening? It's not a matter of yes TIF, no TIF.
Right.
It's how it happens.
Okay, and is there another question?
Yeah, Glenn Colton, and I thought Rich's comments about capitalism failing were quite interesting. And I think the truth is that there's not enough funding available for all the needs in this country. And I find it frankly disturbing that one entity can go in and say, gee, I'm going to do this great thing for you, and it's so great that I'm going to take all your tax revenue for the next 25 years. I just think all of our entities have to start learning to live within their own means. And if these projects are so great and generate so much revenue, then the city of Fort Collins should say, I'm going to pay for this out of a sales tax. Or we'll do a special improvement district on North College to pay for it. But frankly, this town is growing so fast, so much money is coming into it, and we're going to build out within 10 to 15 to 20 years. I frankly don't see the benefit of trying to accelerate any projects because basically...
You have a question?
Are you on the panel?
We need a
I guess,
question.
why should we even do this in Fort Collins?
Why should we do
Why
what?
should we not let the free market work instead
But
of...
you just said capitalism didn't work. I thought that was your inference.
Well, we can't afford... My comment
Let
is,
the free
we
market
can't...
work, Adam Smith, I think.
We're spending beyond our means, and the city is going to other entities saying, we're going to take from them because we can't afford to do it through the regular free market capitalistic system. So
Okay.
why should we be doing TIF?
Okay, I guess Linda would agree with that. Well, not always, not 100%.
Well, certainly, there was a recent article in the newspaper where one of the developers, one of the Brinkmans, said that Fort Collins development right now is at its highest level ever, and basically our economy is on fire. There's a lot of construction out there, and so then you get back again to that, but if, would those things have happened? Maybe not in North College, but we have to remember that Whole Foods did not need TIF financing when they went in that Midtown corridor. The Full Cycle did not, Floyd's Barbershop, Radio Shack. Many businesses are developing in that area without that tax increment financing. And therefore, we need to really ask ourselves, is this needed? East Harmony developed without it. Do we need it? And I think in most of the areas in Fort Collins right now, we do not.
And what about the mall? We don't need it?
I came down to city council and I spoke against the mall package, very strongly against the mall package. I think that it was too much. I think that there could have been some money if they would have cut it in half even. I don't remember what that would have been, from 54 million to 27 million or something like that. There might have been reason to do that in terms of some of the infrastructure improvements and the things that would really benefit the public. But I think that in terms of the not only TIF, but the sales tax sharing and so on, it was far too generous a package, and I think that the developer held the city hostage.
Okay.
Can
You
I
have
use
a
the
comment?
Can I use the telescope again?
Yes, you
Uh,
may.
Once again, you're looking at the actions of a city council. A city budget is so heavily dependent on sales tax. You can't help but try to be aggressive. And it's sad. I mean, I look at the city council and say they are almost held hostage by the failing economy, failing economic model, not the failing economy, but the failing economic model that forces them to always go in the direction of, I have to take action that generates more sales tax. From the telescope, if you will, perspective, the thing that I find a little bit sad about the mall, even though, as I mentioned, I live close to it, it was another heavily publicly funded effort to help us buy a bunch of junk, to just buy stuff. And that's sort of at the heart of an economic model that's not working over the long term, both within the United States and around the world, if the economy is simply driven by, we have to consume more stuff. So I feel it's sad in some ways that we had to put that much money into the mall to get it redeveloped. But on a relative basis, if you're the city council, you have to. It's the only tool you've got today. Or it's the primary tool, one of the primary tools.
Okay, I think there's another question. And I hope it's a question.
My name is Chris Marshall. I work right across from the Capstone project. I also work for All Property Services, which is a real estate, we deal with homeowners that are renting their properties. You say capitalism is broken. I know real estate investors that are trying to buy properties, and in one or two offers, the places are gone. Real estate is booming. Why do we need tax increment financing for big corporate Capstone and not for ordinary Americans?
Who wants to tackle that one? Or is it a rhetorical question?
Shall I be the token business person? Bring your telescope out again, Rich. If you study the property that Capstone was built on to address that particular project, and you're a real estate expert, I see, it was in a floodplain. It was literally unusable land. I agree with Linda that its architecture is challenged. Maybe someday I'll understand it. But we need student housing. Unintended effects. When we adopted the 3 or more, we created a student housing shortage immediately. And then you couple with that, when Tony wants to increase the capacity to 35,000 students, who, by the way, have a positive impact. So I might challenge the amount of money on there, how they did their homework on the numbers. I didn't participate that, so I can get off the hook on that one. But we made mistakes up on our side, too. They weren't intended, but they happened. So.
But I do think that tax increment financing oftentimes is given to the larger companies, and it's because
The bigger amounts of money.
and bigger amounts of money, because they have the people that can ask for it and keep at it, and they have lawyers and they have finance people, and the small business does not, and they're not able to get that money. They may not even know that it's available, or they may be seen as not necessarily worthy of it because it's not. It's not going to be big enough.
It's not easy to put one of these deals together. I mean, the city has worked on the mall for 2 years or more.
Oh, yeah.
Even
Now you
Well,
have,
doesn't
like
the
Jack's, I
DDA
think, was a good example.
I was gonna
Jack's
say-
was a good example of it.
We on the north side are not, we don't, Jack's is our biggest company and our biggest employer. Kroger, King Soopers may challenge them now as far as, and what no one's brought up,
The DDA, I think, gives smaller amounts, right?
they take.
Typically, yes.
It does, and it's a much different thing because
Yeah.
it's an ongoing, and I think its results have been more positive. It's not a single infusion into
Yeah.
a single project. It's
Right.
a long-term commitment that businesses know is out there, they can plan for. The DDA does a lot of other amenities like cultural programming, alley work, and that also reinforces the economic activity. So the DDA, although it uses tax increment financing, it's not a URA, but it's a little bit different, and people can apply to that board for smaller.
But the first
facade
project
grants.
that the city did was Little Valley Steel on
Right.
Hickory. And we were so dumb when we made a recommendation to council, and Kelly caught it, Kelly Olson. We didn't even know how much to ask for it, but the bottom line was, it was a small company that employed 20 to 50 people that would have left most likely to go to Windsor because they needed rail. And they stayed here when we put the water line in. That was the very first project. And one thing that has not been mentioned, jobs.
Yes, that's right.
Jobs. I don't know what your memories are, but we're just coming out of the Great Recession. And it's been economically brutal. A lot of what we're doing, we have $1 billion, you can judge it right or wrong, good or bad. We have approximately $1 billion worth of construction in the pipeline right now. When you look at what Woodward Governor did, as far as jobs, I believe it was estimated 700 jobs, whether that happens or not. The mall, I believe, was 1,500 construction jobs and 1,000 permanent jobs. Again, mostly low-income sales jobs in a retail environment, but we have a lot of college students here that'll probably work down there, and my grandchildren may work down there. So I think that's a strong indicator. I believe I heard, and Linda, you may know this, our unemployment is down to about 5.3.
Yeah, again, our economy is on fire. We're doing very well. And I think that Steve, though, might feel bad about the social services that they're going to have to provide for those low-wage jobs. I mean, that is one of the side effects of TIFs, especially where it's given for retail. So the city benefits from the sales tax, but the county has to pick up the bills for much of the social services.
The city's economic analysis showed that the mall project will generate $13 million of additional cost for Larimer County over a 25-year period of time. And over that 25-year period of time, we will receive none of that incremental property tax. The city will receive somewhere between $100 and $200 million of additional sales tax, but we will not receive any. We'll receive the base amount. We'll receive the appreciation in neighborhood properties that Rich mentioned. We don't know what that'll be, but we do know we'll get $13 million of cost.
And you'll also get some sales tax.
Right, but sales tax
Sadly,
for the
that's-
county is all dedicated for specific
Yes.
projects like open space and the ranch and operations of the jail that's expiring in a couple of years. So sales tax don't help us with the many services we provide, like public health and social services, restaurant inspections. It doesn't help us with, unfortunately. I wish we had a diversified tax base.
Well, you
and that's
could do that,
probably
couldn't
another
you?
question.
Could you propose different financing mechanisms for the county?
We
Or are-
could, to the voters, yes, we could. We
Yes.
have to have the voters approve.
Although you have a cap, so on your sales tax, correct?
Well, what Steve's lobbying for is excellent, and I would really support it. In Denver, they don't have the issue. Our biggest URA area in the state of Colorado is in Denver, and it happens to be the city and county of Denver, so they just sit across
Yeah, they
and
don't
fight
have a
with one
county
another.
here.
And I think what you're really asking is a seat at the table, be involved in these. And I've got to tell you,
Exactly.
my instinct is the council has now become aware of that, and I think, I really truly believe we're headed in the right direction.
I do too. And we're
Okay,
we're
well,
happy about that.
You know, can we go back to the mall for one moment?
Sure.
Because one of the things that bothered me about the mall in terms of figuring out what the increment is the base year. And so we have to remember that the increment is based upon what is the sales tax being, or the property tax collected in a certain year, and then how much would that go up. That base year, and is it 2013? I can't remember.
I don't recall.
Well,
It's
it
right
lapsed
around-
for 2 years, right?
Okay, so it's right around this time period when the mall has basically been closing its doors in order to get ready for future development, redevelopment. And so that base is much lower than it would have been had the mall been operating at a normal level. So not only are they losing the increment, but that base level was so low that you're not going to really be getting the money that you would have been getting had the mall been operating at
Right.
some sort of normal level.
So essentially for that property, we're locked into the recessionary tax
Yes.
revenue condition for 25
And
years.
that's a problem. But it works the other way when you get locked into the economic.
Whereas
boom.
if we had a share of the increment, like we do in the
Right.
DDA, like we do in a negotiation we recently did with a URA in Loveland, they were kind enough to give us a share back. And as some of the city council members have said, they're willing to consider with this project, so we're working with them. If we have a share in that increment, as the demand for services goes up, at least we get some additional money to do that. So we
Okay.
want a seat at the
Right.
table, but we'd also like the ability to serve the
No,
project.
Rich has a comment.
Well, Steve, I'd like to challenge you a little bit, and I'll put my John Knezovich hat on here. If you look at the city, what was it, 3 years ago now? City staff and the elected officials did an incredibly good job of educating the community about why additional sales tax was needed for basic services, police, fire, streets, and some other stuff. In a down economy, getting a community to soundly support a 0.85 cent sales tax increase was a wonderful job because the message was clear and was articulated. So for tonight, candidly, I understand your concern about TIF, and like Ron, I agree you should have a seat at the table. But to suggest that all of the counties, if anyone leaves this conversation tonight thinking all of the counties' financial woes are because of tax increment financing districts, I think misses a huge point, misses the big picture. And
I wouldn't suggest that.
my casual observation.
But that was our topic for tonight. So.
No, but my casual observation is the county has tried, but I don't think has done anywhere near the job that the city did in educating folks about why the extension of some of those sales taxes would really make sense and would alleviate a lot of your concerns.
That's a good point, but that doesn't change the policy question of whether tax increment financing is good or bad.
Okay, well, for your final comments, let's talk about either a different model or what you would like to see happen so that we can continue to have economic development or a healthy community, a healthy economic community, and suggest a different model or what else. And why don't we start with Steve and go down the line, and then we're done.
Sure. I think one thing you've heard from all of us on the panel is there is an appropriate role for TIF, that it does have a place in urban renewal, that it is valuable for certain projects and developments that would otherwise not occur without the infusion of some public money. So, and I think we would all agree that tax increment financing has done good things in our community and can continue to do good things in our community. So I think we agree that there can be good ends from the use of TIFs. I think what we have a concern about is the means. Is this means of taking future property tax revenue from Foothills Gateway, from the library, from the health district, from the county, and hurting the services that we provide also within the city? Is that the proper way to accomplish that? And given the growth of TIFs that we see, even in the Midtown study, the city says there's 17 additional opportunity sites for TIFs. So we see the detriment, the harm that's happening to the county and the other districts is increasing.
Okay,
So
now Ron.
we think and you're going to talk about the share back and the seat at the table, and we think that there is a good way for policymakers.
Well, the problem
to
is
make this
Colorado
work.
statute.
Yes,
So
we need
guess
to
what?
go on, so we
We
finish.
can't solve it locally.
But we can do
Yes.
better than the statutes. We don't have to be the lowest.
That's correct.
We can
and
do better.
I totally agree. So that's why I support Steve's effort to get a seat at the table and discuss these issues. And as far as TIF, it's not good or bad. It's largely the council acting as the URA and the city staff in the way they approach these projects and administer it. I think it's had enormous successes and some failures.
Okay,
But I think
Linda?
council really deserves a lot of credit.
I think we live in a great community, and that's our best tool for economic development. I am not in favor of most subsidies. I think that there have been things in North College that have been excellent, but the best thing that we can do is to keep Fort Collins great and to continue to invest in infrastructure, in our workforce, et cetera, and that will do it. And then I also think, though, that there are other tools. For example, the public improvement fees, where it's more of a user pay, and the sales tax may go up by a little bit for a particular area. That was the model used in Front Range Village that had a much smaller package than the mall. And it's a wonderful place out there. I think the developers have done a really nice job of doing public things that really benefit the public besides benefiting themselves. So I think that we can move largely away from TIFs except in very special cases.
Okay, Rich.
I agree with everyone. So I'd like to end with my telescope if I can, quoting a couple lines from Dave Maney, who writes in the Denver Post periodically. about the kind of dramatic change that's taking place. And his comment here, bear with paraphrasing, is we haven't seen the type of change that's taking place in our society like this. The last time we saw it was 250 years ago when the Industrial Revolution first kicked in. We are likely looking at an opening act that will rapidly become a top-to-bottom rearrangement of how we do everything, how organizations are structured to get things done, how we produce the things we need and want for survival and comfort, how our cities are designed, how we educate our kids, and how we govern ourselves. That's what we're going through right now. And the economic issues we've talked about today are a drop in the bucket. They're a symptom, they're not a cause. But in terms of TIF, be educated, be disciplined, be very selective, sure, and definitely have the county at the table.
Okay, thank you to our panelists and our viewing and studio audiences. I hope this discussion of tax increment financing has been instructive to all of you, and it's not quite as mysterious as it was. Just, I guess we need to all pay attention. This CrossCurrents program will be rebroadcast at various times during the month on Channel 14. Please consult your local listings for the exact dates and times. Copies of recent CrossCurrents programs are available for checkout at all 3 Poudre River Library District libraries, and the video is available at the League of Women Voters website, which is www.lwv-larimercounty.org. Thanks again.